It was a quiet late night in the cramped one-room apartment where Ephora and her daughter Chisholm lived. The air was thick with the smell of burning kerosene and damp laundry, and the only window barely let in a breeze. Ephora sat in the corner, bent over a sewing machine, her fingers moving carefully along the fabric while Chisholm lay on a thin mattress, watching her mother with tired eyes. "Mommy, aren't you tired?" the little girl asked softly. Ephora forced a weak smile, the kind that tried to hide years of exhaustion. She had spent the entire day scrubbing floors at an office building just to earn enough to buy food, and now she had to finish a sewing job before morning. "I'll rest soon, my love," she replied. "You should go to sleep." But Chisholm shook her head and insisted, "Let's pray first." Every night, no matter how hard the day had been, Chisholm made sure they prayed together. And so, with her tiny hands clasped together and eyes squeezed shut, she began, "Dear God, please bless my mommy. Let her find a good man who will love her and take care of her. She's the best mommy in the world." Ephora pulled her daughter into her arms, a lump forming in her throat, and whispered, "Amen." After Chisholm had fallen asleep, Ephora lay down beside her, staring at the cracked ceiling with silent tears filling her eyes. Her thoughts drifted back to the past, the day everything changed. She had become a mother at just 18, the result of one impulsive moment with a boy who promised love and forever. But forever didn't last. The moment her parents found out she was pregnant, they kicked her out without hesitation. The boy vanished too, leaving her with no support, no home, and a growing baby inside her. Alone and scared, Ephora was forced to survive any way she could. She sold oranges on the roadside, washed people's clothes, and eventually cleaned offices for barely enough money. Still, she never gave up, not for a single day, because Chisholm was her whole world. She had dreams once of becoming a fashion designer, of finishing school, but they all disappeared the day she became a mother. And what hurt the most was how society treated her. Every man she met eventually walked away once they learned she had a child. "You're beautiful, but I can't raise another man's child," they would say. "You're a good woman, but my family won't accept a single mother." Those words cut deep, each rejection making her feel smaller, like she was permanently marked by her past mistake. But through it all, Chisholm never stopped praying. Every night, no matter how little they had or how long Ephora worked, her daughter's innocent voice would say, "Dear God, please bless my mommy." It was that constant hope, that unwavering love that kept Ephora going. Still, the city they lived in felt more like a prison than a home full of people who knew her past, full of judgmental eyes. One night, after a particularly hard day, Ephora looked at Chisholm sleeping peacefully and made a decision. Maybe it was time to leave. Maybe it was time to start over in a new city where no one knew her name or her story. The next morning, she gathered what little money she had saved, packed a small bag, and with Chisholm by her side, boarded a bus to Abuja. It was a leap into the unknown, but as the bus rumbled down the road, Ephora allowed herself, for the first time in years, to feel something like hope. Moving to Abuja felt like stepping into a different world. The city was louder, busier, and full of people chasing dreams. Ephora held Chisholm's hand tightly as they walked through the unfamiliar streets, searching for a place to stay. Eventually, they found a small, modest apartment in a quiet neighborhood. The rent was high, more than what Ephora was used to, but it was clean and safe, far from the slums they had come from. It gave her a fragile sense of peace, as if she had finally put some distance between herself and the past. Not long after settling in, Ephora landed a job as a receptionist at a large company. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, respectful work, and it paid enough to cover their rent and send Chisholm to a decent school. For the first time in years, life didn't feel like a constant struggle. Every morning she walked to work with her head held a little higher, her heart a little lighter, and every evening, Chisholm would run into her arms after school, telling stories with wide-eyed excitement. Things were far from perfect, but they were better, and for Ephora, that was enough. Then came the day that everything started to change again. It was a regular morning at work when Chief Damien walked in. He was one of the company's biggest clients, well-dressed, well-spoken, and clearly a man who commanded respect. Ephora was at the front desk when he stopped, looked at her, and said, "You're new here." She nodded politely. "Yes, sir." He smiled and asked her name. "Ephora," she replied. "Nice name," he said before walking past. It was a small moment, barely lasting more than a few seconds, but from that day on, Chief Damien began to take notice of her. Whenever he came by, he would stop to check on her. "Have you eaten today?" he'd ask. "You look tired. You should rest more." At first, Ephora didn't think much of it. She had been flattered before by men who quickly lost interest when they learned she had a child, but Chief Damien was different. He didn't just talk, he listened. He noticed the little things, remembered what she said, and always spoke with kindness and respect. When he invited her to lunch one day, she hesitated. "Sir, she began. But he smiled warmly. "Ephora, it's just lunch." "No pressure." She said yes, and one lunch became two. Two became dinner. Dinner became long walks and deep conversations. Before long, Ephora found herself falling for him. It was terrifying and beautiful all at once. For the first time in her adult life, she felt seen not just as a woman, but as a person worthy of love. But with that love came fear. She had never told him about Chisholm. At first, she planned to, thinking it would come up naturally, but the longer she waited, the harder it became. Each time he looked at her with admiration, she feared the truth would take it all away. So when he asked if she had any family in Abuja, she lied. "No," she said. "I moved here alone." The lie stung her throat, but she told herself it was necessary. Then one evening, Chief Damien looked into her eyes and said, "Ephora, I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" Her heart nearly stopped. She said yes through tears, overwhelmed by joy and fear at the same time. But after the celebration faded, reality crept in. How could she explain the child she had hidden? How could she bring Chisholm into this new life without destroying it? The night after Chief Damien proposed, Ephora couldn't sleep. While she should have been celebrating the beginning of a new life, her mind was trapped in panic. The lie she had lived with for so long now felt unbearable. She had hidden Chisholm from him, convinced that telling the truth would cost her everything. But now, the truth loomed, threatening to unravel the perfect life she had always dreamed of. As she paced back and forth in their modest apartment, watching her daughter sleep peacefully, her heart ached with guilt. She had raised this child through hardship and rejection, through hunger and exhaustion. Chisholm had prayed for her, loved her without question, and now she was planning to ask her to disappear, at least in name. That night, Ephora made a decision that she would carry with her forever. She woke Chisholm the next morning and sat her down, holding her small hands tightly. "From today," she said, her voice trembling, "you will not call me Mommy anymore. You will call me Ephora." Chisholm looked up, confused. "But why?" she whispered. "Because it's important. From now on, if anyone asks, you're my niece, and you're my little mate." The words shattered something in both of them. Chisholm didn't understand, but she loved her mother deeply. Even though her young heart felt confused and hurt, she obeyed. A few weeks later, Ephora married Chief Damien in a grand and beautiful ceremony. The house she moved into was like something out of a dream, large, elegant, with floors that sparkled and walls covered in art. But none of it felt like home to Chisholm. When she arrived, dressed in simple clothes and holding a mop, she was introduced not as a daughter, but as the new housemaid. No one questioned it, and no one saw the pain in the little girl's eyes. Ephra gave her a tiny room at the back of the house and strict instructions. Do not call me Nani. Don't talk too much. Don't let anyone know the truth. At first, Chisholm believed it was temporary. Maybe her mother was just afraid and needed time. But days turned into weeks, and the woman who used to sing to her and hold her close now acted like she was just another servant. If she spoke too casually, she was snapped at. If she hesitated with chores, she was scolded. The kindness was gone, replaced by cold commands and closed doors. Despite it all, Chisholm remained silent. She scrubbed floors, washed clothes, and watched her mother from a distance laughing, dressing in fine clothes, holding Chief Damien's hand. She wanted to understand why. Why had the woman who once carried her on her back and wiped her tears now refused to even call her by name? The only comfort she found was in the kindness of Chief Damien. He noticed her quietness, her worn-out clothes, and how hard she worked. One evening, as she served them dinner, he gently asked her to sit and eat with them. Before she could move, Ephra quickly cut in. She's just the housemaid. Chisholm looked at her mother with pleading eyes, hoping for even a flicker of warmth. But Ephra only smiled tightly and said, "She's used to it." That night, Chisholm cried alone in her tiny room, whispering into her pillow, "Why, Mommy? Why are you doing this to me?" But no answer came. Her mother never came to check on her, never offered a word of comfort. She had everything now, money, a home, a husband, but Chisholm had nothing, not even the mother she once knew. Chief Damien wasn't blind. From the very first day Ephra introduced Chisholm as the new maid, something didn't sit right with him. She wasn't like the other housemates he had known. She was too quiet, too obedient, and far too young to be doing the kind of chores assigned to her. There was a sadness in her eyes, a kind of pain that didn't belong on a child's face. He noticed how she flinched whenever Ephra spoke harshly, and how she never looked her aunt in the eyes. At first, he said nothing, choosing to observe, hoping he was wrong. But the signs kept piling up how similar they looked, the way their voices mirrored each other, the way Chisholm's face would brighten at the sight of Ephra, even when she was being cold. Then one evening, he overheard two of the other housemates whispering in the hallway. "Madame Ephra treats that girl too harshly," one said. "Sometimes she even goes to bed without food." That was the final straw. Then next morning, Chief Damien watched silently as Chisholm scrubbed the front yard under the hot sun, her small fingers raw from the work. He walked up to her and gently said, "Come inside and eat with me." At first, Chisholm hesitated, afraid of what her mother would say, but when he insisted, she obeyed. As she sat at the dining table, timid and unsure, he noticed the way her hands trembled while lifting the spoon. It broke something in him. This wasn't just a maid. This was a child, one who was clearly hungry, scared, and desperate for kindness. Moments later, Ephra walked in and froze at the sight of her daughter eating beside him. "What's going on here?" she snapped. "I told her to eat," Chief Damien replied calmly. Ephra forced a laugh, trying to stay composed. "She's just the maid." "She's not allowed to eat here," but Chief Damien wasn't convinced. "She's a child," he said firmly. "She shouldn't be treated like this." Ephra gave the same tired excuse. "I'm just training her to be responsible." That night, Chief Damien couldn't sleep. The more he thought about it, the clearer it became Chisholm was no maid, and Ephra was hiding something big. A few days later, the head housekeeper, Mama Key, knocked on his door with a serious expression. "Sir, I need to tell you something," she said softly. "That girl, Chisholm, she's not a maid. She's Madame Ephra's daughter." Everything suddenly made sense. The silence, the fear, the resemblance. Chief Damien's heart sank. He thought back to the many moments when Chisholm had looked at Ephra with longing, to the pain she carried quietly and to the cruelty disguised as discipline. He felt betrayed, not just for himself, but for that little girl who had been forced to live in the shadows so her mother could pretend she didn't exist. That evening, he confronted Ephra in their bedroom. "Tell me the truth, who is Chisholm?" Her face went pale. She tried to lie again, but he stopped her. "Don't insult my intelligence." "I know she's your daughter." Ephra broke down, confessing through tears that she had been afraid he wouldn't marry her if he knew. "So you made her your maid?" he asked, disgusted. "Oh, you chose money and status over your own child?" she begged, saying she did it for them, for their future. But Chief Damien had heard enough. "This marriage is over," he said coldly. Ephra fell to her knees, pleading, "But she's my daughter." His voice was like ice. "No, you said she's your mate, so that's what she'll be. And she stays here with me." After Ephra was forced to leave, the house fell quiet. For the first few days, Chisholm woke up early out of habit, still expecting to hear her mother's voice calling her to start cleaning. But the silence reminded her that Ephra was gone. Chief Damien, now her guardian, treated her with a kindness that felt foreign at first. He didn't shout. He didn't give her a list of chores. Instead, he asked how she was feeling, whether she'd eaten, and if she had everything she needed. He saw the hesitation in her eyes every time he spoke gently, like she didn't quite believe she was allowed to relax. It took time, but slowly, Chisholm began to let her guard down. Chief Damien enrolled her in a good school and made sure she had breakfast every morning before she left. In the afternoons, he would be there to pick her up, asking how her day had gone, listening to every word like it mattered. At first, she didn't know how to respond. She wasn't used to being seen, but something inside her started to shift. One evening, after dinner, Chief Damien took her shopping. "Pick anything you want," he said warmly as they entered the store. Chisholm looked around, overwhelmed. She had never been in a store like this, so full of new clothes, toys, and colorful displays. Carefully, she pointed at a simple pink dress. "Just one?" he asked. Surprised, she nodded shyly. "Yes, sir," but Chief Damien smiled and shook his head. "No, my dear. You're getting 5 dresses, new shoes, and anything else you need." Her eyes widened in disbelief. That night, as she laid her new clothes out on her bed, Chisholm felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: joy. Not because of the things she had received, but because someone finally cared enough to make her feel special. In those quiet moments, she started to feel like a child again. No longer the maid, no longer invisible. She was just Chisholm, a young girl who wanted to be loved. And for the first time in a long time, she believed she was. Meanwhile, Ephra's world had crumbled. She was alone in a small, rundown room she could barely afford. With no job, no husband, and no family to turn to, she wandered the streets daily, searching for work. But doors kept closing. Nights were the hardest. She cried herself to sleep, haunted by memories of her daughter's laughter, her prayers, and the moment she called her madam instead of mommy. Regret burned deep in her chest. She had traded her daughter's trust for a fleeting illusion of security, and now she had neither. She remembered the way Chisholm used to wait up just to pray for her, how she would hold her hand and whisper, "God, please bless my mommy." Now that same child had been taken in by the man she had lied to, and Ephra knew deep down she had no one to blame but herself. Still, she hoped. She prayed that one day, maybe, she'd be given a second chance, not because she deserved it, but because love, somehow, had a way of surviving even a worst of mistakes. 6 months passed, and life continued to bloom quietly for Chisholm in Chief Damien's home. She was now a bright student, excelling in school, and finally living the childhood that had been denied to her for so long. Every morning, she ate breakfast with Chief Damien, and every evening, they spent time in the garden, reading, or simply talking about her day. It still amazed her sometimes how a man who had once been a stranger could love and protect her like a real father. She missed her mother, of course. That pain hadn't gone away. But in her heart, she had come to accept that people make choices, and sometimes those choices hurt the ones they love most. One Sunday afternoon, while they were sitting on a wooden bench under the sun-dappled trees, Chisholm turned to him and asked softly, "Sir, do you think one day Mommy can come back?" Chief Damien was caught off guard. "After everything she did to you?" he asked gently. Chisholm nodded. "She wasn't always like that. She used to love me. I think she just got lost." That night, Chief Damien thought about Chisholm's word. Despite all the pain her mother had caused her, this little girl still found space in her heart for forgiveness. And that said everything about who Chisholm truly was. 2 days later, they drove to a poor part of town, and when they arrived, Chisholm immediately spotted her mother sitting outside a rundown compound, thinner and weaker than she remembered. "Mommy!" she cried, running to her. Ephora's eyes widened in disbelief. She stood up slowly, and when Chisholm threw her arms around her, she broke down in tears. "I missed you," Chisholm whispered. "I missed you too, my baby," Ephora wept. Chief Damien watched from a distance, giving them a moment. When Ephora finally looked at him, her face was full of shame. "Sir, I don't deserve this." "I don't even deserve to see her again," Chief Damien replied. "You're right, but your daughter still loves you. And that's why we're here." He gave her one chance. "Come back home, but if she ever hurt Chisholm again, she would lose her for good." Ephora fell to her knees, swearing through tears that she would never take her daughter's love for granted again. Back at the house, things didn't fix themselves overnight. Rebuilding trust takes time. Ephora worked hard every day to prove she had changed. She packed Chisholm's lunch for school, helped with her homework, and most importantly, listened. For the first time, she was truly present. One evening, as they all sat at the dinner table, Ephora turned to Chisholm and asked gently, "Will you pray for us?" Chisholm smiled, clapped her hands, and said, "Dear God, thank you for giving Mommy another chance. Thank you for giving me a family, and thank you for Daddy, who showed us kindness when we didn't deserve it." As the words hung in the air, tears welled in Ephora's eyes. She had once thrown everything away for status and fear, but love, pure, unconditional love, had pulled her back from the edge. This story, though fictional, reflects a painful truth in real life. Sometimes people we love the most hurt us because they are afraid of being alone, of being judged, of losing what they think they finally earned. But in trying to protect themselves, they lose the very people who made them whole. Ephora's story is a lesson in what happens when we value appearances over honesty and comfort over connection. Yet it also reminds us that no one is beyond redemption when love still lingers. Whether you're a parent, a child, or someone who's made a terrible mistake, this story shows that with humility, accountability, and love, second chances can heal even the deepest wounds.